without a doubt, I think it's by far the best league in England.
How dare you score like that in the Premier League?
Mission accomplished in the Premier League. The American.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the American Scouser TV's Premier League show. We are getting ready, gearing up for match week 21, which is crazy to think. We are already past the halfway point plus a match. Paul, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing all right. Happy beginning of the week. I am looking forward to talking football and not talking work. That's for sure.
Yeah, not talking about work sounds like a good idea. And I think talking about work would probably lead to a little bit of complaints. And most people have complaints about VAR. So I thought, we normally talk about our VAR segment every week where we go through some of the key takeaways, specific matches. It's been a bit since we had a Premier League round of fixtures. So I didn't think we should be rehashing VAR decision, seeing that we've had some League Cup semifinals and the FA Cup without VAR in it, which is always refreshing when you go a weekend without complaining about VAR, except for only to complain when bad calls happen because you don't have VAR to correct them, which is always entertaining in itself. I was waiting for Arsenal to be petitioning to have VAR put in place just to then petition after the match to have it removed. But before we get to that, let's talk a little bit here. As the graphics stated, we are at the halfway season review, and the KMI panel has released their first half results. And I do find it interesting. They're making sure that they tout the fact that the numbers are better than last year's numbers, but they're still acknowledging that they have a long way to go before getting this right. So let's just start with the big one, which is they have acknowledged that they have made 3 incorrect VAR interventions, which is the exact same number that they had last season. We're not going to talk about all of them, but these were the Bournemouth winner, which was disallowed against Newcastle in extra time, the West Ham penalty that was awarded against United in stoppage time that ended up costing Ten Hag his job eventually, and then the sending off of Norgard against Everton. Do you remember any of those specifically, Paul? Do any of them stick out in your mind more egregiously than the others as far as how the results went and what ended up happening?
I remember all 3. I think the one that was probably the most egregious was the Bournemouth one, in my opinion. The Nordgaard one was like, I thought it was wrong, but it was one of those like impact plays where like I think that, once you slow something down, it gets a little bit dicey when you start interpreting where the impact is and how quickly and all that stuff. But I think the Bournemouth one is the one that sticks out. I remember the West Ham one, but I mean, I also think that Ten Hag was just simply on borrowed time. So like, I don't think, him losing directly impacted that situation outside of just speeding up the inevitable there.
Yeah, I think the only thing with that one was it was just so bad because Coop makes the call right in front of his face, and then Michael Oliver sends him to the monitor, and then Coop just runs over, and then the moment he goes, he just like turns around, makes a call, but nothing on the monitor actually showed any more of a foul than he saw in real time, which he waved away like demonstratively. So it's just classic example of bad process. I understand what they're doing when they want to make these conversations. I think this next round of discussion is a little bit more. So they're claiming that they have missed. There were 17 missed VAR interventions in the first half of last season. They're saying this season that has been reduced to just 7. And of those, of the 7 that the panel voted, 2 of them were 5-0, just absolute egregious mistake, misuse of VAR. 3 of them were 1 to 4, and then the last 2 were 2 to 3. So I mean, I have a hard time when a panel of 5 votes on something and you have 2 to 3 and then you rule it as a mistake in either direction, because it feels like it's just as subjective. But focusing on those couple, the 5-0 were the Bruno red card versus Spurs, which eventually was rescinded on appeal and voted by the panel to be an ultimate mistake. And then maybe the worst call of the whole season was João Pedro not getting a red card for trying to take the guy on Brentford's head off with the elbow that he throws back, and he just absolutely misses. But I mean, it's so blatant, it's so awful. It doesn't matter that he doesn't make contact, and the fact that VAR doesn't do anything. So do you have a bigger problem with the mistake being made on the field, or the fact that VAR is blatantly missing these in situations that you just can't miss?
Oh, God. I mean, I want to say probably the fact that you're missing straight reds on the pitch, but it's also one of those, like, if you're VAR, I don't know what they're training them to look for or at, right? Because you're obviously not going to be able to see the entire pitch at all times. So I don't know. I do feel like at some point somebody had to have seen that somewhere and should have thrown like the white flag up, you know? I don't know though. I think I have a problem. I guess to answer your question directly, I think I have a bigger problem with getting it wrong on the like calls that are on the pitch, because to me that comes down to process, right? And if you're running an entire system, you have to have the right process, or else the whole thing is buggered. And so, like, I think at the end of the day, I have a more problem if you have your process wrong than you do if you're just missing things that you didn't see or didn't have covered.
So obviously those are the 2 big red card ones. One being a red card that was issued, and one being a red card that they felt should have been given and was completely missed all day. The other 3 that kind of were in that 4-1 vote was the denial of the goal scoring opportunity by Ian Maatson against Villa, or against Palace. It was never checked. He gets a yellow card. They don't send him off. The offside goal that Decore versus Wolves, the goal shouldn't have stood based on all accounts and the rules, is what the panel is saying. And then the Estupiñán red card, which to me might be one of the worst ones of all year, because he goes in, he lunges, and yes, you could say, oh, he's trying to make a tackle, his leg comes up high. But at the end, he catches the player like above the shin guard with force, can break his leg, and he skates the entire thing. Like, he doesn't even pick up a yellow card. To me, it was just like maybe the worst application of VAR used all year long. What will it take? How will they eventually fix these missed VAR interventions? Like, how can they improve the use of something that they've had 3 years to figure out how to deploy and still can't seem to figure out when to pull the ripcord and when to keep your mouth shut?
Well, I think the bottom line is I don't think it is going to improve unless they continue to work on and get on the same page in terms of standardizing the actual process, right? I think you have different refs that are doing different things in terms of how they handle being called to the monitor. And you have, I think, like, and maybe this is where like Atwell, like, sort of being like, or certain referees being almost confined and isolated to VAR and specializing in VAR would almost help, because you'd at least have some guy up there applying it consistently, right? And then any sort of variation in the process is down to the on-field ref. I think if you have consistency upstairs and then you can sort of iron it out on the pitch in terms of like your match referees handling it like the same, then I think we start to get some improvement. This also feels like when you get like a new like support manager in at a job and they start saying like, oh, look at all our year over improvements. but really like the previous totals have been inflated a little bit. You maybe relax your standards somewhere to get certain numbers up. It feels like you have the ability to manipulate this thing, right? And I think I don't think any of us expected them to come a year over and be like, oh, we actually were worse this year, right? Like maybe the threshold for what counted as a mistake just got a little higher, like type deal. So, but I think I really do think like, this goes back to what I've been calling for and what we've been talking about with a third party running the booth. If we can't have a third independent party sort of police the police, at least if we have sort of designated referees that we know are consistently going to be on VAR, I think that may help get some consistency to the process.
Yeah, I don't disagree there at all. This is how they have fudged up these numbers, in my opinion, and how they've reworked wording to try to make things work better for their cases and their arguments. So, now they have a section of this review called the referee's call, which is a new category to effectively replace clear and obvious, because clear and obvious made no sense. So it shows on-field decision. It's supposed to show that the on-field decision carries more weight, which means some decisions are judged to not reach the threshold of a VAR review. So ultimately, so far this year, they've determined that 12 of these have been committed in comparison to 18 at this point last year. So that new language is helping somewhat. Or ultimately, my question is like, really, is it? So if you look at these 12 situations, right? It's when a penalty should have been awarded, but wasn't. 8 times, all 8 times not given initially on the field. So they're acknowledging that there are 8 additional penalties that should have been issued this season so far. Now, we've had this conversation before.
So our numbers on you already. Like,
what do a lot of this have to do? What do a lot of these things have to do? Ipswich, West Ham, Southampton, Bournemouth, Ipswich, and Everton. Those are all sides battling relegation or bottom half of the table. All that should have been given or awarded a penalty. Of all of those, there could be up to like 19 points of swings, especially Ipswich, because 3 times they had leads when they should have been awarded penalties in matches they went on to lose. Lose, not just draw or drop points, lose where they could have had multi-goal leads. It's brutal. The only team that's really benefited from it, Leicester got away with 2 of those penalties, because I feel like every one of these penalties is basically that wout face guy just tackling someone from the side, reminding everyone he isn't a Premier League defender. Only 1 time this year has a penalty been awarded that the VAR panel believes should not have been, which is high comedy to me. But that was the West Ham penalty that was awarded versus Villa. West Ham's really done well here throughout the season when it comes to VAR, which is crazy when we look at the table in a little bit to see how far down they are. And then we have red cards not shown that should have been. Leicester City, Ndidi on Palmer, and Brentford, Pinnock on Watkins. So a couple of those, and then 1 goal disallowed that should have been counted. But seriously, how can we take these numbers right? They're telling me that 1 goal all season long should have been disallowed, or should have counted that was disallowed. Like, seriously, there's no possible way that you can take any of these numbers seriously, can we?
I'm going to go with no, doctor. And that's just like, I mean, you hit the nail on the head when you start moving verbiage around and stuff. And like, when you really start digging in, you can manipulate the data, right? But like when we see like, oh, we had 17 of these last year, we have 7 this year, and that should be like, it just doesn't feel like we can feel the change. It doesn't feel that great, right? Like I can tell you. But what does feel great though is this weekend, these matches had a nice ebb and flow to them, didn't they? Like
They did, and we're going to get to those matches in 1 second. Look at the do a little FA Cup review of the third round. I will say they did acknowledge that there have been 5 times this year where a second yellow card has been incorrectly shown. So players that ended up with reds that they feel shouldn't have received them. And then 3 times this year they're claiming second yellows have been missed. Again, these are just asinine types of discussionary points to me because I just don't really believe like we can take them at like face value and try to honestly say like there haven't been 2 or 3 more times where guys should have got another yellow card that didn't, or every single second yellow was justified except for the 5 that they're pointing out. It just seems very, very silly. I will say none of these are like the ones that people will think of, like the Declan Rice yellow or the Trossard yellow. All of these were determined to be the proper calls on the field. These were all more like Morgan Gibbs White, the Baliba second yellow where he got the red card like twice in 2 minutes. There were a couple other specific ones that popped out, but none that really jumped out at me. To me, this just buttons it up that VAR is just a work in progress. But for all the people who want it to go, I would just tell you to get used to it because it's not going anywhere. And we have to do more with working with this panel and seeing how we can improve this. But I think the first thing they can do is get more of a third party view on it and less ex officials telling us that their official friends are doing things properly um, within the confines of what the rules are today. So let's take a look here at the draw of the next round and the upcoming fixtures. This will be the 4th round of the FA Cup. There are 4 matches that are still to be determined. I believe Millwall won this afternoon, so they'll be taking on Leeds United, which is just a classic match of 2 fan bases you don't want to cross in a dark alley. Preston Charlton tomorrow. Winner will take on the Wickham Wanderers. Leighton Orient Derby will be the sacrificial lamb that goes up against City. And Mansfield Town or Wigan will host Fulham. Paul, when you look at this 4th round draw, we'll leave Liverpool and Plymouth. The one big upset of round 3 was Plymouth, and their reward is to get the team at the top of the pyramid. It's brutal the way these draws work. What to you is the biggest tie? Is it Villa Tottenham? Is it maybe a old school battle like Birmingham Newcastle? Like what jumps out at you when you look at this 4th round ties that have been pulled out of the proverbial hat?
I mean, I think that the thing that jumps out to me is that both of the teams that are sitting at the bottom of the league could potentially find themselves out of this competition because I think both Burnley and Coventry have the ability to win those matches. Not so much because Burnley brings much to the party, but just Southampton is so toothless right now that I could see them just getting overrun by any side that has any sort of like whiff of confidence about them. I think Coventry does some nice stuff offensively that could cause an Ipswich team that really struggles defensively to sort of hang on to that. I will say I think Ipswich probably will squeak through here just because they have enough, I think, offensively to get past that side. But, I mean, both of those, I think, are teams that are in the balance. Obviously, the big match to me is the Villa-Tottenham one, just because those are 2 heavyweights, based on all those fixtures. That's kind of the heavyweight fixture there.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think Brighton-Chelsea has a chance to be a really interesting one because it's at Brighton. How will they go about that match? Will they go, more looking for the scalp? Will they be looking to rotate? It's always interesting to me when you can see some of these lower sides. Obviously, there's a little bit of drama with, Rude going back to United, I guess, taking Leicester City up to Manchester United. That Leicester team is just so poor. I just don't really see them doing anything there. I guess let me ask you this, Paul. There was chatter about this. We had it a little bit on our post-match show. I asked Kazi and Sir Z regarding the FA Cup and kind of the pageantry behind it and whether it had lost the allure. I know you're a big fan of the FA Cup. You've mentioned in our Discord chats really loving these early rounds and like the magic of the FA Cup. Has the FA Cup lost any of its luster for you? Is it still as important as it used to be? Like, what do you think it is about it? Because I do see a lot more people kind of almost starting to hanker it to being more like the League Cup and something that you don't need. It's a nuisance more than a love affair that maybe it was 10 or 15 years ago.
Yeah, well, I do think that it has lost its appeal, and I think that is just to do with the injection of the huge injection of cash into the game globally. Like, 10, 15 years ago, we didn't have these monster TV deals. I just think in a way there's less parity because of the way things are now. And I think that has kind of led to lessening the appeal. The other thing that I think has to do with it, I think it's the cash injection. I think it's the continual piling of fixtures that's also caused this to be less attractive to people, because the clubs care less about it than ever, because they have to prioritize all these other competitions, right? So if you're in a top 5 of any major league for this FA Cup or for the English Premier League, you're having to manage this on top of your other cup matches, Champions League, and then you've got people going on internationals. I think it's very, very difficult to build a squad that can be, competitive across all fronts. And so I think the FA Cup and the League Cup do have a tendency by a lot of clubs to be sort of deprioritized because of that. Now, for me personally viewing it, I love it because I enjoy watching the lower leagues. It's a different brand of football. I enjoy watching it. I also enjoy the feeling of seeing these small stadiums and like the obstructed line of sight or the terribly low camera angles we get in some of these stadiums. I think I don't know if it's nostalgia, but it just feels like a little bit of a blast from the past that you don't get very often.
Yeah, I mean, it was basically Kelly walked downstairs. I think whatever it was, Sunday morning or Saturday morning, whenever Saturday morning, the Tamworth game was on, the Spurs game. And she literally looked up and she was like, "Are you watching a game at Lusitano Field?" Like, Lusitano Field is where like the local semi-pro, like Portuguese guys from Ludlow play at, right? Like, it's where we go watch like the Western Mass Pioneers. And like, these are guys who are like a division or two below like MLS 2. These are guys that are local electricians, and no different than the guys who were playing Spurs, by the way. And Kazi made a nice point on our show where he was like, "Look, it's all made up for these guys. They had to win 7 matches just to play Spurs." Now, I made the argument, is the lack of replays and the financial wherewithal of what used to be the major windfalls, like that club really gets screwed over. They should have earned themselves a replay at the London Stadium. It would have gotten them, a windfall that would have been 10 years worth of earnings probably on one afternoon. Now, on the other hand, right, if there were replays, they probably would have been knocked out twice when they played teams 2 divisions above them earlier in their 7 rounds that allowed them to qualify to get to the Spurs match, because they got to penalties twice and won on penalties by playing 0-0 draws out. I mean, I think there's chicken and the egg type of a situation. My argument is should it be a seeded draw? Should all the matches, like at this point, when you get down to 40, shouldn't it be like 20 Premier League teams host 20 lower level teams, all to be played in the Premier League stadium, so that we know we're injecting this cash back into the lower league levels? Because I just don't feel that enough money gets sent down the pyramid. And I think that until they redistribute the top end wealth, we're just going to keep getting Manchester City being like, yeah, it's okay. We can send out our youth team. We'll still find a way to win. And if we don't, it's like a free hit for us because we send a bunch of kids out. And if we lose, it's not a big deal. And if we win, we got all these kids extra time. Like, am I off here? Like I feel like this tournament and the League Cup should be used to promote the lower divisions and financially balance the playing field however they can.
I like it. So I think the premise is right. I think the argument that can be made is that if you seed this thing, you're going to have less of those lower teams making it further because you're going to have less of them playing each other and more of them playing, Premier League teams likely to get bounced. Right?
That's true.
So I think it's like, the way it is now, it's like, we always hate it. We get an early round draw. We got to go to United. Right. But the lower teams probably love that because somebody's going home. Right. One of the big dogs is going out. So I think these arguments you made, but I think the premise is 100% spot on. I think the emphasis should be on injecting cash in the lower leagues at every opportunity across the board.
So the Premier League kicks back on tomorrow afternoon with its program. We have I think it's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday fixtures. All 20 Premier League sides will be playing. Let's start by taking a look at the bottom of the table after 20 matches played by everyone except for Everton, which that match was announced finally today. It will be played on, I believe it's Wednesday, February 12th. So I believe it's after Bournemouth and before Wolves. So it's a midweek fixture after the League Cup semifinals, Champions League is over. So it's that period in between, probably when the knockout rounds of the Champions League will be happening. So I've been saying all along, it looks to me like, the bottom three teams will be the bottom three teams. But as we continue here, Everton, Wolves, Ipswich, and Leicester are staying within touching distance. If you had to pick one of those sides to find their way out of the bottom three that is currently there, which one would it be, Paul?
It would probably be Ipswich. I would say Ipswich just because, they've seen to have the most, they've shown the most flashes of putting it all together. They just haven't been able to put it consistently over for 90 minutes very often. But if you look at that, they're, one of two teams in that bottom five that has found a way to win matches in the last five, right? So, I think that bodes well for them. I'd say that. And then, of course, we always talk about, Everton being built to survive this. I think it's really just going to come down to whether that defense is good enough to paper over an offense that can't put goals in the back of the net. And for Wolves, it's going to be the opposite. Is that offense enough to overcome a defense that can't stop a broomstick? So it will be interesting to see what happens.
So obviously, Everton made the move since the last match, and they've replaced Sean Dyche. They've replaced him. They're just proving you can go back to the future because they're going back to David Moyes. I guess, is Everton more equipped to stay up today or less?
I guess the only thing I can think is that they think somehow that Moyes is going to improve their attack. I personally just don't see a sizable enough improvement to I think you may take a small step forward offensively. I think you take a pretty decent step backwards defensively. I think if you're there with Dyche, if you're in a relegation battle, I think what they do defensively is probably needed in this situation. I don't love the move. A, because it's a retread, and B, because we've seen it time and time again. What I can say about Moyes is he definitely seems to have a pretty good manager bounce when he gets into a new club. They seem to hit a little bit of a bounce, and maybe that is what they are. Maybe this is a bridge gap, right? Maybe they think they can bring him in. They can get a nice 6 to 8 week bounce out of him that gets him out of immediate danger. They can ride it into the summer and then have a candidate. That's the only thing that makes sense to me for that.
I cannot imagine that they're opening this brand new stadium and they're like, and during the first match, we're going to go for a 1-0 David Moyes
Who wants
smashing
to
grab.
see a low block 4-4-2? like
Just unbelievable. West Ham also made a managerial change over the last 2 weeks, finally letting Julian Lopetegui go after what has been probably the most disappointing campaign of any one side based on what they did in the summer and what some of the expectations were. God knows what Anon thought was going to happen in our Discord channels. West Ham appointing Graham Potter. Right level, right higher. I mean, this feels like it. I feel like he has the similar type of players profile, has similar level of quality around the pitch in different areas like he had at Brighton. Like, if they really believe in him and give him a couple years, could this have been like a sneaky good move and probably what they should have done when they decided to move on from David Moyes in the first place?
I mean, I think it's a home run hire. If you're a West Ham supporter, I feel like you've got to be really excited about it because, like, is there a possibility it doesn't catch on? Sure. But we also have a proven track record of a guy who knows how to come in and can take a club to dizzying heights on that table, far above expectations given the talent level. And he's got the pieces in place to build around. So, I mean, I think I'd be really excited if I was a West Ham supporter. I think that's about, like, when you look at the landscape of managers, and it's very, very, I feel like we're hitting, I think we're hitting a point where there's less and less like outstanding young managers that are really bursting onto the scene. So I feel like this is about as good as you can get without A, hiring a retread, or B, going with an unproven manager. I think this is right down the middle in the sweet spot. I think it's a great hire for them.
Yeah, I was shocked it took him that long to get a job. I know he was close to, excuse me, I think he was close to the Palace job last year, and then they hired Glasner, and then there was even talk about him maybe being interested in going back to Brighton, but they obviously really were interested in Hertzler. It'll be interesting to see if he does well at West Ham, if he tries to make a move somewhere else. Like, does he see? It always felt like maybe he was hanging on for like to see if Ange got blown out at Spurs, or like that might have been like the type of move he'd make. He doesn't appear to be ready for that, obviously, based on his time at Chelsea. I just don't think he was ready for that much of an ego worth of players, but also at the same time, I don't think that Chelsea was ready to give him the power that they, seemingly gave Maresca at the same exact time with a manager who had actually less experience. So it'll be interesting to see how the bottom of that table. Let's take a look at the top of the table. We have a clash of two of the top sides when Liverpool takes on Forest tomorrow. We'll talk a little bit more about all the matches that we are going to preview in a moment. But Arsenal sticking in there, both of them 6 points back. Obviously, both also Liverpool has the game in hand. And then we go to Chelsea, Newcastle, and City, kind of bringing up that next rung, followed by, of course, Bournemouth, Villa, Fulham, and Brighton. I ask you this all the time, Paul. How far will City get in this table before it's all said and done?
I mean, I still think the ceiling for them is third right now. I could see it happening. It's going to take Forest to start conceding goals, which they're not. So I think fourth is certainly attainable. Considering the fact that Chelsea's had a really hard time finding consistency. They had a great run of form, like 4 to 6 weeks ago, kind of top out, and they've tumbled over the last few weeks and sort of regressed to the mean. So I could see City certainly getting fourth. I think third is probably as high as I can see them going. But I got to tell you, as much as they're starting to sort of figure this out and get going, they got to get past Newcastle first. In Newcastle, outside of Forest, those are the two hottest teams in this league right now.
Yeah, I could see both Forest and Newcastle continuing on their winning ways. I don't know that Forest will pick up all 3 points this week. I think Liverpool's a tall ask, but playing at Forest is not going to be an easy result for either side. City's got its problems. Obviously, there's talk about them bringing players in. Omar Mamouche from the Bundesliga, an attacking player to really finally give them an Alvarez replacement. But then there's talk that Kyle Walker is asked to leave the club, and it sounds like they're going to let him leave on a free transfer, just out of respect, which is kind of an interesting one to me. I think this could be a really, really interesting 3 to 5 months for Manchester City and how the rest of the season pans out. If we look at the bottom half here, Bournemouth through Brighton. I think I asked you this last time. I think you might have said Villa. If I asked you right now, Bournemouth to Brighton, which of those sides has the best chance of going on a sustained run and putting together themselves a European style finish?
Yeah, I know you like Bournemouth here. I'm probably still going to stick with Villa. I'm going to stick with my guts because I had them top 5 preseason. So if I'm going to be wrong, man, I'm going to be consistently wrong through the entire year.
I don't blame you there. I will say, when we talk about it, you look at the screen and you think to yourself, why is Bournemouth doing so well? It's like, well, they haven't dropped points in the last 5. And they are scoring goals. They're defending better. I still think that they have a wobble in them here or there, and they have like the letdown type of a performance. I really like the Fulham side, but that's just, we talk about it all the time. It's just too many draws. They draw a lot of matches, 9 draws already. And I do think that that's going to be a big difference. And I really think that will end up being what spurns this forward. So before we go take a look at this week's fixtures, I will give you this opportunity now. It's January 13th, Paul. Is Liverpool winning the league?
Yes.
What would it take for Liverpool not to win the league?
I think it's going to take injuries. I think it's going to take an injury crisis. And yeah, that's it. I think it's going to really come down to just health. I don't think I think if Liverpool loses this title, it's because Liverpool loses this title and not because anybody comes and wins it. That makes sense.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I honestly feel like in many ways, the reason I'm as confident as I am, one is that I've seen them play a different brand of football and a different style of football that should bode better when it comes to the injuries and the way that they train and the way that the way that the bodies have responded to the grueling play, because there hasn't been that much more rotation or less than we've been used to seeing in the past. It's just been less exertion when they actually play. And I think it has a lot to do with them doing less when they train. I genuinely think it has as much to do with the rest of the league being down and there being injuries. And just, Arsenal doesn't look up for it. They lost Jesus again. They have Saka out for months. Odegaard doesn't look the same player. United's going through their wobbles, but can still pop up and take points off someone like a City or an Arsenal at any one moment. And I just think there's just too many sides out there that creep up and take points when people aren't expecting it. And I think we're doing a good enough job of securing those points. And we've secured enough early. And I think that that's going to lead to us being able to grind results. And I think it might end up looking closer than it really is by the end of it all. But it doesn't matter to me if we win by 1 point, as long as we're the ones hoisting the trophy up against Crystal Palace at the end of May. So let's take a look at the fixtures that we're going to have coming up in the next few days. Start with tomorrow, Chelsea, Bournemouth, West Ham, Fulham. The big one, top 2 of the top 3 sides, Liverpool going to Forest, and Brentford versus Manchester City. Starting with tomorrow's matches, Paul, let's leave the Forest Liverpool one aside, as we know we're going to talk a lot about that in our weekly podcast on Monday night. Which of those other three matches are you most looking forward to? What would you be watching for in these matches?
Gosh, leaving Liverpool aside, probably the Chelsea-Bournemouth match because I think it has pretty big implications for the rest of the season. Chelsea desperately needs 3 here, right? I think they really need 3 here. Bournemouth coming away with 3 here, I think would be a statement. I think Bournemouth go in here and are okay with the draw. I think Chelsea are not okay with the draw. And so I think that's going to be an interesting one to see. And of course, side note, we'll keep one like half eye over on the City match as they try to seem to get some sort of momentum going here.
It's another big day tomorrow too. Supposedly, I think the Premier League announced they would basically reveal any teams that have violated any financial sustainability rules from 2021 to 2024 tomorrow. So it'll be interesting to see if there's anyone surprisingly finding themselves in the newspapers, whether that be City, whether that be United, potentially Wolves, Chelsea, even Newcastle has had fears of PSR at times. So it'll be very, very interesting. There could be some folks prepared for prepared statements, as they like to say, as in the lawyers wrote these statements in case, and not in case, but in the case that someone proves this as true. We'll move on to Wednesday. Obviously, I think there's no question the biggest match probably of the slate is the North London derby between Arsenal and Tottenham. How could you pick what you're going to get from Tottenham? They either beat Liverpool in the league or can't beat a bunch of welders on a Sunday morning, or they'll go spank Arsenal by 5 probably in the North London derby. What do you expect from Arsenal-Tottenham? If you were Mikel Arteta, how would you be going about this match? Because in a weird way, I feel like he has as much, if not more, to lose than Ange, and Ange is the one who should be on the hot seat.
Yeah, I think for Martena, I'm probably holding this one pretty tight to the vest. I would come with a relatively compact shape, and I would make Tottenham break that down, and I would try to beat Tottenham on the counter. I would try to absorb any sort of offensive. Like, I would try to lure Tottenham into coming in and trying to beat them on the counter because I think they are so susceptible on the back. But I think Arsenal, in the shape that they're in right now, if they push too far forward, are going to be inviting problems with the pace of that Tottenham front line.
United take on Southampton. That's about as get right a game as a match as you can ask for. Coming off an emotional positive when you advance past a team like Arsenal, I think that's still a good victory, even if it's with a reduced lineup and, in an FA Cup playing against 10 men and you block a penalty and all these things. I think you have to feel good if you're United, if you get through that and you advance. And obviously you feel good coming off probably their best performance in the draw against Liverpool since Amorim took over. What's a positive result here? Is it a resounding victory, a thumping victory? Could it be a 2-1 squeaker as long as you show progression? Like, if you're a United fan, after you get done throwing up in your mouth, how are you judging your side's performances at this point under Amorim? Because I feel like it's a conundrum.
I think if I'm United, I just want a complete performance. And by that, I want to see like some fluent offensive attacking football that looks coherent, and I want a clean sheet, right? Like I think if I'm a United fan, I don't care if it's 1-0, 2-0. I just want a comprehensive, like complete match that feels like we dominated from front to end. Because I feel like there's pieces there that we see. I still think like there's just too many pieces that don't make sense offensively for this side. But I just want to see them put all these little 15, 20-minute spells together into one match, one complete sort of performance.
All right, well, talk about a complete performance. That's what this was. It was a talk around the VAR reviews of the first half, a little FA Cup review, We checked out the table, and of course, we previewed the matches that are coming this week. If you haven't already, please get on over to the YouTube channel, give that thing a subscription, like it, leave some comments, invite a friend. If you want to get involved, send us a message. We're always looking for new contributors in all ways. Don't forget to check out some of our other programs. And for myself and Bickler, have a great week. We'll be back next week with another edition of the Premier League Show. All right, everyone.